"Hey waitress, you've soaked the whole table." Table 13 was packed with 4 ex-SEALs, drinking and roaring with laughter. The brown-haired woman in a faded apron bent down to wipe up the spill, saying nothing, not even looking up. No one knew she had pulled 3 soldiers out of an ambush with her bare hands and transfused them with 2 bags of her own blood. No one remembered her name. Until one of the men suddenly collapsed onto the tabletop and she uttered 5 words. 5 words that brought the crowded bar to a deadly hush. Who was she? And why was the one thing erased from her record the very thing that saved lives? They called her Lex, but few knew her real name was Anna Carson. She appeared in the bar as if she'd been there before it even opened. As if no one had hired her, she had simply slid into her position. Behind the counter, tray in hand, eyes never lifting above the bar top. Her shoulder-length brown hair was always tied neatly at the nape, her faded gray t-shirt and worn apron, her uniform indistinguishable from any other bartender. Yet something kept people at a distance. Norfolk, Virginia, the city of ships, farewells, and badges that still smelled faintly of gunpowder. The Anchor's Rest was the place where those who once wore the uniform sat together without saying much. There, the past lay hidden in the bottom of a bourbon glass, and in scars no one needed to display. They came to forget, to hold on to something that the outside world had tried to crush. Anna moved like a shadow among tobacco smoke and clinking glasses. She served swiftly, precisely, never forgetting an order. Her fingers were strong. The veins on her wrists pronounced a testament to years of training that civilians never endured. She wore no badge, flaunted no history. But the scar behind her left ear, a small V-shaped mark, appeared when her hair shifted, like a leaked fragment from a file that had been erased. They whispered about her when she passed their table. That she had been one of the rare female SEALs, that she couldn't handle the pressure, or worse, that she had failed and been discharged for reasons left unspoken. Some scoffed that she was only pretending. One sneered, "A SEAL? Probably just paperwork duty." She never replied. Questions fell into silence, as if into a chasm. Every night she folded napkins as though folding bandages. She wiped tables as though sanitizing an operating table. Each movement was unreal in its precision. No one asked why, and she never told. People easily hate those they refuse to understand. Friday nights were always crowded. Beer flowed nonstop. Veterans' laughter mingled with music from the rusted jukebox. Anna wove between tables without brushing anyone or making a sound. She dodged crude pickup lines and skirted ambiguous questions about her past. When a patron got too drunk, she only needed to look, and they stopped. Pete, the bar manager and former Marine, never inquired about her record. He simply said, "She handles a bunch of drunk sailors better than the cops ever could." For Pete, that was enough. Sometimes, when the night ran late and the bar emptied, she'd sit at the far corner of the counter, glance at the wall clock, then close her eyes. No one knew her thoughts. One staff member once saw her spin a small silver coin on her fingertip before slipping it into her apron pocket. They thought it was a quirky habit. No one realized it was a mission challenge token, something only those who'd faced life and death kept as a silent oath. Table 13 at the far corner, where the amber light always flickered, was where she lingered a breath longer. Maybe because it was nearest the exit. Maybe because it reminded her of something, a secret she would never speak. Then, on a Friday night like any other, when cold beer flowed and laughter echoed off the battered wooden walls, Table 13 was no longer just a quiet corner. Something was coming. A moment when every dormant instinct within her would need to awaken. Have you ever met someone you were sure was more than they appeared? Don't go away, because something is about to happen at Table 13.
Welcome to Veteran Best Stories, where the war ends, but the stories live on. From the foxholes to front porches, we honor the silent battles our veterans still fight. Subscribe and walk with us beyond the battlefield.
The drunkenness didn't arrive like a tornado, it seeped drop by drop like blood from a deep wound. And that night, at table 13, Gavin Harley was bleeding slowly. He had been a SEAL, not the kind listed on paperwork just for filling a spot, but the combat type, the one who went ahead of the team, the one his brothers trusted when a weapon jammed, when the map went dark, when everything fell apart. A mission in Kunduz Year 5 that nobody wanted to mention had earned him a Purple Heart and a Navy Cross. And trophies never handed out in the light, insomnia, haunting memories, blank spots in his mind. PTSD was not a wound you could bandage. Gavin still wore his old military jacket, its unit patch faded to a whisper. He came to the Anchor's Rest every Friday night, sat at the same table, ordered the same beer. He spoke little, laughed more when drunk, but that night was different. His face had drained of color. His hands trembled incessantly. His breath felt crushed against his chest, not just by liquor. When he reached for his glass, his fingernails were purple, as if starved of oxygen. Yet nobody noticed. They were used to nameless scars, and too many veterans hiding pain behind laughter. Only Anna stopped. She was wiping the bar when she spotted the silver coin Gavin pulled out. He didn't flash it, he quietly placed it beside his hand as he dealt cards. But Anna knew that coin there was no mistaking it. An old mission challenge token, issued only under unofficial circumstances as a vow among those who had stared down death together. No instructions came with it. Its value existed only if someone else held the same. Anna's eyes lingered on Gavin's coin-bearing finger. Then they settled longer on his chest, where his jacket rose and fell unevenly. She heard what civilians could not, the ragged, stuttering gasp of a machine about to shut down. Gavin lifted his beer glass, a movement that seemed ordinary. But in that instant, his hand shook so violently the glass nearly toppled, and his eyes flicked to Anna. A fleeting look, but one of panic. Not drunkenness, real panic. As if in that heartbeat, he'd lost control of his own body. The crowd around him still joked. One of his drinking buddies even slapped Gavin on the shoulder, thinking he was getting into the spirit. No one saw the vein at his throat taut as a plucked string. No one saw his fingers clench the table's edge, blue veins popping. Only Anna, who'd just set down a fresh bottle, paused for an extra half-beat. She said nothing, but her gaze had changed. It was no longer the detached look of a server counting tables. It switched modes as if something inside her had awakened. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 6 seconds passed. She looked back at Gavin. This time, more closely. His collar was dark with sweat, despite the cold air conditioning. His shoulder twitched. His hand dropped the glass to the table, not from drunken clumsiness but muscle spasm. Someone laughed when beer splashed everywhere. Only Anna stepped back, then remained frozen. She was listening to a racing heartbeat. She wasn't timing it by the clock, but by the abnormal breaths of someone slipping past the brink of life. Gavin groaned softly, not loud enough for anyone to catch, but enough for Anna to know. This was no longer PTSD at work. This was acute heart failure rushing toward him like a bullet. And if no one intervened, it would hit. She drew the cloth from her apron, a movement as gentle as every night, but this time, not to wipe a table. She clenched it in her fist, eyes never leaving Gavin. The question wasn't whether he would collapse, but when, and whether anyone would notice before it was too late. The first sound was the shatter of glass, a dry, jarring crash, then silence. Not screams or calls for help, but the sound of an object striking the floor, a very human sound. A heavy body thudded onto the worn wooden planks, a chair screeching behind it, and the entire room hesitated. Gavin Harley had collapsed. No slow drop, no warning. One moment his hand rested on the table, the next, His head struck the edge of the glass top, sending shards flying into a silent pool of beer and blood. Everyone instinctively recoiled, carving out a bizarre emptiness in a bar, usually overflowing with laughter. Beer splattered across clothing. A woman screamed, fumbling for her phone. Someone tripped over a chair leg, cursing. Another veteran, twice deployed to Iraq, stood frozen like a stone statue, mouth working without sound, eyes glazed over. And Anna still did not move. She stood perfectly still for exactly 2 seconds, no twitch, no sharp intake of breath, no heroic sprint forward, no frantic shout for an AED like in first aid manuals. She simply looked at Gavin with the absolute focus of someone who had witnessed life slipping away beat by beat. 2 seconds. Long enough to confirm. This wasn't alcohol poisoning. It was asystole, complete cardiac standstill, when the heart emits no electrical signal. No pulse, no rhythm, no time to wait for a certified rescuer. Anna stepped toward Gavin, knelt, and placed 2 fingers on his neck. No pulse. She closed her eyes for 1 second, then opened them and reached into her apron pocket. The silver coin, Gavin's own token from the table, now pressed beneath his chin to trigger the jaw thrust reflex, a maneuver only those trained in combat medicine execute correctly. The goal wasn't to restart the heart, but to keep the brain alive long enough for circulation to return. From behind the bar, she retrieved a bag of ice meant to chill beer bottles, wrapped it in a clean cloth, and secured it around Gavin's neck and forehead with a charging cable, cooling the vagus nerve. Protecting the brain. Buying precious seconds. No one understood her actions. The bartender nearly rushed to stop her, but Pete, the owner and a Fallujah veteran, raised a hand. He recognized the precision, the calm, and knew this was no spontaneous panic. Anna dropped to both knees, placed her hands on Gavin's sternum, and began compressions. But this wasn't civilian CPR. Not 30 compressions and 2 breaths. She pressed specific points on his breastbone in a strict internal rhythm. Echo 13, a medical protocol erased from official training as too complex for civilian use. It was designed for battlefield clinical death, where only human hands and a 90-second window stand between life and oblivion. 30 seconds. No response. 60 seconds. She shifted her hand position, continued pressing. 75 seconds. A bead of sweat rolled down Gavin's forehead. 85 seconds. Anna held the tempo unbroken. 95 seconds. A ragged gasp echoed, a sound not of simple breathing but of a body fighting for existence. Gavin's eyes fluttered open, blurred, unconscious, but alive. His breathing uneven, his gaze panicked, his hand twitched. Anna laid a hand softly on his shoulder, so gentle no one noticed, then rose, removed her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the bar. Beer still pooled on the floor. Pete called 911. By the time paramedics arrived, everything was stable. 1 man saved, 1 rescuer unmoved, and a hushed bar. Someone asked, "Are you an EMT?" Anna offered no answer. She slipped out the back door without looking back. Some people don't act because they're allowed to, but because they know that if they don't, no one else will. Who do you think Anna really is? And why does she know what even rescue teams never taught? Dear viewers, stay tuned for the next part that will leave you in awe. Take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and drop a comment below, telling us where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always thrilling to see people joining us from around the world. The next morning, the surveillance footage from Anchor's Rest began circulating quietly on veteran forums. The clip was grainy, shot at an angle, under low light, but the action was unmistakable. A woman in an apron performing bizarre chest compressions with extraordinary speed and precision. A SEAL who had served in Afghanistan commented simply, not an EMT. This is Echo. The name Anna Carson was quickly searched through military and civilian databases. No record in SEAL registries, none in tactical combat medic training rosters, none in any medical training files. Invisible. Silent. Clean to the point of suspicion. But real soldiers don't stop at easily searchable facts. A still from that night, her brown-haired silhouette with a hand on an unconscious man's chest, was run through an internal facial recognition system. It took less than 2 minutes for a match to appear. Alexandra Lex Carson, Tactical Medics, Syria, 2018. Her file was stamped, Restricted, Command Only. Under her name were 3 brief lines. Operation Smoke Veil, MIA, no extraction. 4 survivors, 1 remains. Request for discharge. Approved, SEAL level redaction, executed. She was the sole survivor, the only reason the other 4 lived, and she personally requested to exit the system and erase every official trace. Lex Carson refused all treatment programs, all honors. Instead, she vanished into civilian life as if she had never existed. The story of Echo 13 resurfaced in hushed conversations. A protocol removed from training because it was too complex for civilian scenarios and lacked standardization. Yet those who had used it or had been saved by it knew it wasn't a technique, it was an instinct. An instinct honed in blood, smoke, and the razor's edge seconds that leave no time to speak. At a small gathering of former SEALs at the Tactical Medical Coordination Center in Pensacola, someone placed Lex's photo on the table and asked, "Who let her do that?" The reply came as a slow shake of the head. No one. But she did. And if she hadn't, he'd be dead. An internal email from an ex-naval physician to the Special Records Archive read, "Request temporary Echo 13 access. Purpose, cross-check real-world application in Norfolk. Evidence suggests this protocol can still save lives despite its official deletion." From one night at Table 13, Lex became a shard of memory returning to crack open a system that believed itself whole. She made no plea for reinstatement. She sought no glory. Yet that silent, unauthorized act forced even the highest-ranking officers to pause and ask, had we discarded something vital simply because we didn't grasp it fully? In an unrecorded phone call between 2 senior officers, one phrase repeated itself. She didn't act for the medal. She acted because if she hadn't, no one else would have survived to tell the tale. And indeed, Lex Carson never returned to the bar after that night. Her locker was emptied, her uniform folded away. No note was left. No one knew where she went, and no one dared ask directly. Because they understood some people, if you ask for their record, will fall silent. But if you collapse, they're the only one who will run to save you. Have you ever met someone like that? Someone who wears no medals, carries no name tag, but is the very reason you're still breathing? Lex's action did more than revive one man. It resurrected an entire protocol once deemed obsolete, unteachable, even dangerous if misused. Within 48 hours of the Anchor's Rest incident, an emergency internal meeting was convened at the Navy Medical Operations Center, behind nameless doors and past checkpoints, requiring more than a single security badge. They never spoke Lex's name, but that bar video was replayed at least 5 times. Each replay slowed down, every motion scrutinized, no wasted movement, no delayed reaction, no errors. An officer who had once vehemently opposed retaining Echo 13 now sat silently staring at the still frame on the screen. Lex bent low, bar light highlighting her collarbone, her hands pressing in a rhythm never taught in civilian first aid. She didn't wait for orders, he finally said, and if she had, he wouldn't be alive. Echo 13, the unofficial name for a suite of combat medical protocols developed around 2005 and refined from direct experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan. It was never written into textbooks but circulated as a secret code among survivors. How to compress a shattered chest cavity manually, how to induce temporary central nervous cooling when no equipment is available, how to perform field transfusions with a rinsed urine bag in gravity. It once saved hundreds of service members but also felled some who tried it without the nerve to follow through. So it was expunged, shelved, sealed away, much like the people who devised it. But Lex pulled it from the shadows not by petition, not with reports, but by action, and that action forced the system to take notice. The memorandum titled Empirical Analysis of Echo 13 for Emergency Civilian Application was distributed to special training units. The reconstructed guidelines were rewritten for the first time in nearly a decade, not for mass rollout, but to preserve them correctly and prevent further decay. In the margin beside the title, a handwritten note read, "Not every battle happens on the battlefield. Train like someone's life depends on it, because it does." A medical task force from the Naval Special Warfare Center was dispatched to investigate the scene, not to assign blame, but to relearn. They located Pete, the bar owner, and asked about Lex. He handed over her neatly folded apron, the empty locker, and a plastic index card left in the drawer. A list of complex cardiac intervention steps printed so small you had to squint. On the back was a single line in cold, precise handwriting. Protocol isn't permission, it's preparation. The combat medics held that card, silent for a long time. 1 week later, copies of the advanced first aid instructions appeared on bulletin boards and medical retraining centers at major bases. No author was named, no official protocol title listed, but anyone who had served in combat knew exactly what it was: Echo 13. And in the meetings that followed among those accustomed to decisions by seal rather than sentiment, one resolution was unanimous. Echo 13 will never be widely publicized, but it will never be buried again. No one could reach Lex. No one knew where she was. But they understood one thing clearly. She had left behind a trace, not of her identity, but of hearts she had saved. How many vital practices have been shelved for being too risky when what truly deserves risk is human life? Dear viewers, grab a glass of water and stay tuned for more astonishing developments. Comment 1 if you found this story compelling, so we know you're still here. Table 13 was no longer a place to sit. 1 week after that night, those who had remained silent returned. They brought a small American flag folded in full military funerary protocol, a clear glass box containing the silver coin, the last fragment of memory from a battle no one was ever allowed to recount, and a small wooden plaque, painted sky blue, hand-engraved with a single line, "For the one who came quietly at the right moment." There was no ceremony, no brass band, no press, just a handful of veterans from different units, some wearing old SEAL logos on their shirts, others in faded baseball caps. They sat in silence, staring at table 13, as if it were a relic not for someone lost, but for someone who ensured death did not occur. Gavin Harley remained in the Naval Hospital, recovering slowly but steadily. His heart beat again. He regained consciousness. And then, one day, a handwritten letter arrived for Pete, the bar manager, in a small, unmarked envelope. Inside was a scrap of paper, scrawled in bold but shaky handwriting. I do not remember her voice, but I remember the feeling. When I lost control of my own body, the first hand to press on my chest did not tremble. She did not wait for the system. She was the system. Pete folded the letter in half without reading it aloud. He pinned it to the bulletin board beside photos of local service members who had fallen, making it part of the place, a shard of collective memory for the entire community. Marcy, the new waitress, young, blonde, with bright nail polish, was the first to ask, "What's with that table?" Pete pointed to the silver coin and the wooden plaque, then explained briefly. Someone who served here saved a life, and no one knew what she'd done before. Gradually, customers began to ask. Few knew the full details, but they viewed Table 13 with a strange reverence. One patron, once skeptical of Lex, after learning the story, sat for a long time at the next table, just to be closer to something I once failed to understand. Over the next week, a small notebook appeared behind the bar. No one knew who brought it, no note included. It was a battered medical field journal, but inside were battlefield first aid protocols, even beyond EMT level. On the final page, a line in black ink read, "When the system lags, humans must be prompt. When the heart stops, do not ask for permission, ask who is still alive." Marcy closed the notebook and placed it carefully beside the medicine cabinet. She began to memorize its steps. No one asked her to. But from that day on, she never again ignored a patron, saying they felt weak or were struggling to breathe. Pete looked at the notebook, then at Table 13, and simply said, "This can't be taught. Only those who have lost everything know what cannot be lost again." Among the SEALs, a saying began to spread. If someone tells you Echo 13 is a myth, tell them about Table 13-inch Norfolk. And somewhere far away, where no one would search, Lex received a small hand-delivered package. Inside lay a new silver coin, engraved with, "Protocol isn't permission, it's remembrance." Nothing else accompanied it, yet she smiled for the first time in years. She knew her hand had done what was right. Not for a medal, but because there was still someone left to live. How many other Lexes are silently among us, those whose names were erased, yet whose quiet actions still preserve life? There are those who never speak up, yet always arrive at the right moment. Lex's story isn't just about a woman who once was a SEAL or a forgotten protocol. It's a reminder that courage, compassion, and life-saving knowledge should never be buried simply because they lack official recognition. We live in a world where systems can be slow, but people, if they have the bravery, can still be on time. If this story reminds you of someone who quietly helped you, who kept you from the brink, or shone a light in your darkest hour, leave a comment for them. They might be reading. They deserve to know they were never invisible. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, not just to support this story, but to spread the word about what should never be forgotten. We tell what no one else does, because someone needs to be remembered.